Hi, I'm Josh, and I'm so grateful you're here with me today. This video about the games played in April, the fourth month of the year, is brought to you by the number 4, because in the month of April I acquired 4 new board games. I played 4 board games, all 4 of which were brand new to me, and I have 4 video games to talk about, 2 of which are new to this channel. The other 2 I've talked about previously. So I'll begin by talking about the board games, and then I will get into the video games. This video is divided up into chapters so that if you want to skip one or the other, you can go ahead and do so. Now, the month of April is my birthday month, and typically I like to go out and treat myself to a couple of new games for my birthday, and this month was no exception. And either fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, I did acquire some games before my car broke down and I ended up with $3,000 worth of repairs. And then I found out that at least one and possibly both of my children are going to need braces. So yeah, typically my money that I receive from my wonderful, faithful Patreon supporters is the money I use to purchase new games and is generally my entertainment budget for the month. However, for the next little while at least, I think my Patreon money is just going to have to help me pay bills for a while, which I guess is arguably even more important that I have those Patreon supporters to help me get through the challenges of life. So I am always so grateful to those supporters. Now, in terms of the board games that I purchased before all the financial situation went completely belly up, there were a couple of games that I've been trying to get hold of for quite some time, and I was finally excited to receive. One was a little card game called Flip 7. Another one was a 2-player game called A Jest of Robin Hood. The third was a cooperative board game called Bomb Busters. And then the fourth and final one was a game that I pledged on Kickstarter quite some time ago, and I received my copy of Agemonia in the mail. So that was pretty exciting to receive as well, on top of the 3 games that I had purchased for myself. So I have managed to get 3 of those 4 games played at the point that I'm recording this in early May. 2 of them I got played in April, so let's get right into the board games that I played in April. As usual, these games will be listed in order of my lowest rated game to my highest rated game, and the first couple games that I'm going to talk about are games that I played on the website Board Game Arena. So the first one is a game called Pirates of Maracaibo, which I played solo on Board Game Arena. And despite the fact that I'm always attracted to a pirates theme, I would perhaps rename this game to Euro, the Euro game for Eurogamers, because it is very much all about intertwining game mechanisms and pulling levers and pushing buttons and affecting various areas of the game. It's obviously very much mechanically focused rather than thematically focused, although the theme is worked into it as well. In fact, in this way, it's very reminiscent of a game I talked about recently called Darwin's Journey, which is another one that I played on Board Game Arena. They are very much similar in the fact that they have a lot of intertwined mechanisms, a lot of kind of very mechanical stuff going on in the designs. But I will say that I think I enjoyed Pirates of Maracaibo slightly more than I enjoyed Darwin's Journey, and I definitely understood it better. Now, in Pirates of Maracaibo, you're basically doing a few journeys with your ship across this layout of cards from one end to the other. Then you go back to the beginning, you do it, and you do it a third time, and along the way you're activating various locations to do various things in order to try to get the most points. The first time I played, I focused on collecting emeralds, and I lost that game to the AI opponent, 116 points to 112. In the second game, I focused more on exploration, and I lost that one by an even wider margin of 131 points to 109. So it is very much a game that, while there are a lot of different things that you can do, a lot of different ways to get points, it really encourages players to focus on one specific element, I think, and really push hard for that one aspect of the game. So while there is this sort of point salad feel in that there are many ways to get points, and everything you do gives you points. The game really does kind of force you to narrow down your focus to one thing and see how well you can push that aspect of the game. I think, again, I lost both games, so I could be completely wrong, but I was feeling fairly proud of how well I was doing, given the fact that I had never played this game before, and especially in the second play, I thought I had done quite well, but I lost even worse. So the AI definitely beat me both times, and I was trying to figure out how the AI managed to do so well, despite the fact that I had thought I had done quite well in the game. And after the second game, I went to look at the AI points, and I really couldn't make heads or tails of how its scoring worked. So I realized that there's some weird stuff going on with the scoring for solo plays, where the solo game awards extra points to the AI player in order to provide a challenge to the human opponent. And I guess if I were to ever play this game again, I would really want to spend some time looking over exactly how the AI opponent scores points in the game, so that I know exactly what I'm up against and maybe how I can mitigate it. And I think it would be fun to play this in person with a physical copy if I ever had the opportunity, but I just don't see it as being the type of game I'd want to play solo again on the computer. I rate the game 6.5 out of 10. I'm a very thematically oriented person, so these kind of slightly heavier Euro-style games aren't always my cup of tea. There are some that I do enjoy, but this one was decent, but certainly far from being a favorite. Now the next one, again, was a game on Board Game Arena called The Guild of Merchant Explorers. And this one, in comparison to Pirates of Maracaibo and Darwin's Journey, was much easier to learn. It did provide a fun solo challenge to play on the computer, and it basically gives you these targets of victory points to aim towards. The structure does play out in a similar manner to how Pirates of Maracaibo does these three phases of the game. Guild of Merchant Explorers also has a few different phases where you start in one area of the map and you start exploring outwards, and then you kind of shrink down to one or more smaller areas and explore outwards again, and do that a few different times, and again try to do a bunch of different things in order to collect a bunch of different points. And so, like I said, they provide these victory point targets for the solo experience. In order to beat easy mode, you need to get 90 victory points, and basically money is victory points, so the amount of money you earn in the game is the number of points you get. And I chose to play on easy and beat it quite handily. I ended up with a score of 139. I managed to complete all three of the gold cards, and so I well exceeded the 90 points I needed to beat the easy opponent, or easy victory point goal. And in fact, I would have also won on normal mode, because normal mode is 120 coins, and like I said, I had 139. But if I had played on hard mode, I would not have beat that, because hard mode you need to beat 150 in order to win. And it's just, you're not necessarily playing against opponents so much as you're playing against yourself to try to better your own score. And so I don't know why they even have you choose easy, normal, or hard mode to play on, because you can just play the game and they can tell you how well you did based on your score. I don't know. Anyways, I thought it was fun. I gave it a 7.5 out of 10. This is a game that, I wouldn't mind owning and playing more, but I'm in a situation where I'm really just trying to keep the best of the best games on my shelf and simplify and get rid of anything that isn't the greatest of all time. So I don't think I'll go out and actively seek out this game, though I would maybe play it again on Board Game Arena if I felt like reminding myself how to play again. Now, the other two board games were now the physical copies of games that I had picked up. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Flip 7. This is a small box card-based game that is very much a push your luck game that takes kind of the general structure of blackjack and builds on that, adds some interesting elements to it. And it's very much a similar thing where you start by getting dealt one card, everybody gets dealt a card, then going around a circle, you can choose to take another card or pass and take the points that you've accumulated so far in the round, obviously with the risk being that if you bust out, you don't get points that round, and ultimately you're trying to work towards a certain number of points, like say you're trying to reach 200 points for victory. and then it's played over multiple rounds as players bust out or pull back for their points. So anyone familiar with blackjack will be familiar with the general structure of the game, and so it's very much a very simple, decent group game to play with pretty much anybody. I played it with my two boys, with Evan and Wyatt, and we had a lot of laughs, especially since I found out that my younger son Wyatt is quite a gambler. He will always push his luck and almost always push it too far and bust out, but he just always needs that one extra card to get the big points, and it very rarely works out for him. So it's kind of funny. Flip 7 has this thing on the box that says the world's best card game, or the best card game in the world, or something like that, and it's close. There are better card games, such as Age and Avenue, for instance, although Age and Avenue is strictly a two-player game. So I suppose that for more than two players, perhaps Flip 7 is one of the best card games in the world. I'd rather play standard No Limit Texas Hold'em than Flip 7, I suppose. But that being said, I'm not trying to take away from it. It's an excellent game. I rate the game 8.5 out of 10. Evan struggled to give it a rating because he said, as a strictly party game, he would give it a solid 9 out of 10. Like, it's just a super fun game. But in his mind, if he's comparing it to all his other favorite games of all time, like Arcadia Quest or Yager Ensemble and those type of games, he says it's more like a 6 out of 10 as a game in general. So I suppose that in the broader context, Evan will go with a 6 out of 10, and then Wyatt went with a 7.5 out of 10, which honestly, both those ratings were lower than I expected. I was a little bit surprised that they weren't higher than that, and neither of them have requested to play the game again since, which is unfortunate, because I think it's a super fun, super easy game to learn. You just learn a few rules, you start playing, it goes quickly, you have a great time, have a laugh, and move on to the next thing, or maybe even play again. So Flip 7 is great at what it does, definitely. Now here, the other game that I was a little disheartened at the lack of enthusiasm with which it was received, because this is Agemonia, a gigantic, huge box game that is probably about as big as the Gloomhaven box, if you're familiar with that, and maybe even slightly larger. This is a gigantic fantasy campaign game where you're in this strange fantasy universe. You're playing through the campaign game by game and telling a story as you go, I suppose. So the game is structured in that the first 3 scenarios of the campaign are tutorial scenarios. So they'll start out with the first tutorial scenario. You'll learn kind of the basic game mechanisms. You'll go into scenario 2 and it'll add on with a few extra mechanisms, and then by the end of tutorial scenario 3 you'll know all the rules you need to keep going with the rest of the campaign. And we did finish 2 of those first 3 scenarios in the month of April, and just to compare to that other big box fantasy campaign game Gloomhaven that I have played through, I will say that Agemonia is much more narrative driven than Gloomhaven's more tactically driven gameplay. So as you play through a scenario in Agemonia, your characters are walking on the map and you are basically discovering locations. As you reach each location, you draw a specific card that tells you what you have found, how you can interact with whatever it is you found. And there are many, many such locations on every map that you're playing on, so that there's a lot of discovery and exploration, but also a lot of kind of short paragraphs of text to read as you're discovering things and decisions to make on how to deal with them. Now, like I said, my kids' reception was good, but not as exciting as I was hoping. In my mind, I was hoping that this was going to be a Gloomhaven for my kids. So Gloomhaven became my #1 game of all time. The people that I played through the campaign with were also just super excited about it. We just played it regularly over the course of about 50 games or thereabouts, and just loved it. So I was hoping for a similar experience with my kids. However, this isn't one that they've been requesting to get back to. The ratings were decent. So I have given Agemonia an initial impressions rating of 9 out of 10. So it's very high, not as high as Gloomhaven. I still enjoyed the tactical play of Gloomhaven more than what we've experienced so far in Agemonia. Although again, we haven't played the full game. We haven't got to the end of even the third tutorial scenario. Wyatt's first impression rating was 8 out of 10, and Evan's struggled to give a rating. He said he didn't really want to give a rating because for a couple of reasons. One is that again, we haven't learned the whole game yet. Another reason was he was sick when we were playing this, so he wasn't feeling well. He was tired while we were playing and not super into the game, but he decided that he would go with an initial impression rating of 8 out of 10, but he feels like he needs at least one more play to really tell what he thinks of the game, which is fair. I don't know. It's a game that I spent a lot of money on Kickstarter. The problem with Kickstarter, of course, being once I convert my Canadian dollars to the often US currency or whatever. I don't know if it even was US currency for Agemonia, but then you also add in the shipping prices of a giant game like this, and it gets ridiculously expensive. And I'm at a point where I'm half tempted to just turn around and sell it and try to recoup a decent amount of the money I spent on it, as opposed to trying to prod my kids to play a little bit more. On the other hand, I want to give it a fair chance before I sell this game that I've put so much first money into and then learning. It is a rules-heavy game. There's a lot of little fiddly rules that, as the person running the game, I really need to have down pretty solidly, and I know that I was messing things up even when I was playing with the kids. So you need that one person at least who knows the rules inside and out, and I didn't quite get there yet. So I'm on the fence. I'm not sure what to do about this. I'm not sure whether to sell it or to give it a try with 1 or 2 more plays and see how it goes. But let's get into the 4 video games I want to talk about. The first 2 are updates on games that I've previously talked about, and I'll go in order of the games that I had the most hours into to the one where I had the fewest hours into it. So I'm going to talk briefly, very briefly, again, about Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I'm at 166 hours into this game as of the end of April. And every month that goes by, the rating of this game just drops a little bit more and a little bit more. So I started off with a very high initial impression rating of 9.5 out of 10 for the first 80 or so hours of the game. Then once I rolled over around 100 hours, I dropped that to 8.5 out of 10. And now that I'm over 150 hours, I'm dropping that again to 7.5 out of 10. I explained last month the major problems I had with the game, which is the fact that you're just doing the same repetitive things over and over and over again for hundreds of hours, only in slightly different environments. So the game could have been absolutely amazing. It could have stayed at that 9.5 out of 10 if they had just edited it down to a really solid, much quicker playing game experience, as opposed to just dragging it out seemingly indefinitely. I don't know how long it's going to take me to get through this game. And the main issue I'm running into is that it's such a mindless experience. There's almost no thinking involved because you're just running around and you're fighting people. Every so often they have this slightly different change up on what you're doing, where they're going to present you with some information, and then a character is going to come back and test you on that knowledge to see what you've retained, and that's kind of fun. There's another one where I had to solve some riddles, and in that instance, that was amazing because in that case, I didn't have any previous information to work on to go on. I just had to use my own head, and that was super fun. So the very, very rare instances where you actually get to use your head and think a little bit, the game really comes to life. But for the most part, you're just shutting your brain off and you're running around mashing buttons, and which is fine because it is fun. It's still 7.5 out of 10. That's still a very good rating. But it just gets boring after a while. And what's funny about it is when the evening comes around, I've done my tasks for the day, I'm tired, I just want to sit down and fire up a video game. I know what I want to do is start up a new game, learn something new and exciting, but there's that mental hurdle of getting into something unfamiliar, having to go through that learning curve of learning how a new game works. And it's just so much easier to flip on Odyssey, mindlessly go through my next series of quests and just, shut the brain off and run around for a while in that world. And so pretty much inevitably end up turning to that. So, it's a very good game that could have been amazing if they just edited it down. The next game I'm going to talk about is ShellShock Live, just because I played it again with Wyatt in a 2-player hot seat format. Wyatt and I also had 2 other AI tanks to deal with in this particular battle, so it was sort of a 4-tank free-for-all. and Wyatt ended up putting the finishing shots on all three of us. He took out one AI, then the other AI, and then ultimately destroyed me. So even though I've been playing this game a lot more than he has, he managed to take all of us out. And yeah, I'm still stuck on the single player mode. I've pretty much given up on trying to advance further through the single player campaign just because the level of difficulty means too much grinding and it just gets way too boring for me. The next two games I'll talk about are new to me video games, or at least new to the channel. The first one is the Planet Crafter, which I have 11 hours into at this point. And the reason I started playing this game was because I really wanted another experience like Subnautica. Subnautica and Subnautica Below Zero remain the one shining example of a video game that really got its hooks into me and kept me engaged and interested for many, many hours. And the Planet Crafter was described to me as more or less being like Subnautica, but in space on a planet where very, very similar to Subnautica. It starts out almost identically, where you're falling to this planet in a escape capsule thing. You land on the planet. Now you got to get out there to survive. In Subnautica, you're underwater, so your breathing is an issue. You either have to keep coming back to your base or get to the surface initially. On this planet here, the Planet Crafter, oxygen is a similar issue. You have to keep coming back to your base to breathe again. So there's overlap there. There's definitely overlap with the fact that in the Planet Crafter, you're running around gathering resources, using these resources to build a base, to build techs, and ultimately what you're trying to do here is terraform a planet. So you're on this barren, hostile planet, and you're trying to do things to increase the oxygen, the pressure, the water content, and generally just terraform this into an inhabitable planet. And it does very much play like a low-budget Subnautica. The issues I have with it are, whereas in Subnautica there's tension in that there are dangerous animals in the environment that will attack you and put your life in danger, and the further the game takes you into the depths of the ocean, the bigger and scarier these creatures become. But also, of course, you're leveling up your technology, and so you're able to deal with the increased risk dangers you're running into. Whereas in the Planet Crafter, the tension comes from time limits. So whereas in Subnautica, I could turn off the aspect of having to constantly eat and drink and focus only on the oxygen and survival aspect of the game in order to remove any time pressure whatsoever. What I loved about Subnautica is I could take everything at my own pace. I could take as much time as I wanted exploring things, and obviously I knew there would be dangers to deal with, but I could also escape to safe zones and chill if I needed to. Whereas in the Planet Crafter, initially especially, you don't have a way to manufacture food, and there is food to be found in the environment, but that's eventually going to run out, and you're going to have to figure out a way to start making your own food. So there's this initial pressure to get those technologies discovered, and there is no way to turn off the constantly having to eat and drink. So those are things I'm constantly having to keep an eye on, these sort of time limits. And I don't like typically things that have a time pressure to them. That is one kind of stress that I more or less avoid in my gaming. Even with board gaming, I don't like real-time games because I don't know if it's because of the 16 years I spent as a paramedic, where everything about the career was obviously huge time pressures to get to patients, to treat patients, to get patients to the hospital before they died or whatever terrible things were happening to them. So there was always this huge time pressure, and that was one of the bigger stresses of the job. And so when I go to my entertainment, I don't necessarily want that in my entertainment. There is some satisfaction to be found in the game just by unlocking new techs, and especially in watching the planet gradually terraform, watching the orange sky turn blue, and then gradually start to rain, and starting to grow some grass and some water and stuff like that. That's kind of fun. But the other weird thing about the game is all of the resources are literally just sitting on the ground. There are just hundreds and hundreds of individual resources that you got to run around, pick up, either use them right away to build stuff or take them back to your base to store for later use. And I guess it's not that much different than Subnautica, where you're having to break into rocks or go into different environments to find different resources, but it feels more like busy work in the Planet Crafter, where you're just running around, picking up resources off the ground, using them to build stuff with this time pressure ahead of you. So it's not nearly as satisfying an experience as Subnautica. I give it a rating of 6 out of 10 just as an initial rating. I don't think I'm going to necessarily stick with this game. In a similar manner to Odyssey, it is nice to just kind of shut off my brain, run around, do stuff, terraform this planet, but I think it's probably even more boring than Odyssey, to be honest. And then the final video game I'm going to talk about is called Against the Storm, and I've been looking for a fun city building type of game, or even beyond that, an empire building type of game. I've been trying to find a decent one of those too. I previously talked about Age of Wonders 4 last month, and how that was a game that I thought I wanted, but is very kind of too involved for my tastes and what I was looking for. And it turns out Against the Storm is a similar situation where you got this really neat concept of this city building. What I love about this game, and what prompted me to pick this one up, is the fact that with these empire building games like Age of Wonders or the Civ games, you obviously start with your tiny little people and village, and you expand and expand and expand, and the game eventually ends after whatever conditions are met. The problem with those type of games, for me anyways, is that once your empire or your city gets so huge that the amount of micromanagement gets overwhelming towards the end of the game, where you got a million things going on in real time that you're trying to keep tweaking and adjusting and trying to accomplish. And I don't necessarily, I guess what I'm saying is probably the early part of the game is the most fun, when you're going from almost nothing to a decent sized empire, but then it expands to the point where it just gets to be a little too much. What's great about Against the Storm is that you start by building your city, but then it reaches an end point, and then it kind of shuts you down, forces you to move to another location, start a new city with some of the things you had acquired and learned from the previous city, and you start again. You start small, you expand it out. You reach your goals, you then shut it down, move to another location, keep repeating that process. So you're always in the part of the game that's the most fun, going from a tiny little couple of buildings to a nice little decent sized thriving city. But as with Age of Wonders 4, I just found that the amount of detail you need to learn makes this learning curve that is a mental challenge for me to overcome. So it's cool. It's got a lot of detail and a lot of things going on, but that also means that there's a lot to learn very quickly. And so there's this push and pull where I want to be doing something interesting and fun. I don't want to be trying to struggle and get over hurdles and actually learn in depth how it all works. I just want to have a good time. Problem is, you can't really have one without the other. So, you know, there's a bit of a challenge there. And I don't know if I'm going to keep playing Against the Storm. I only have 3 hours into it so far. I'm only on my second city. But even if I went back to the game now, I'd probably forget almost all of what little information I had figured out to this point. So the more time passes, the least likely I'm going to get back to it. But it's cool. It's got cool graphics, a neat fantasy theme, and just interesting stuff going on there. But I'm not exactly sure if it's for me or not. I gave this a 6.5 out of 10 as an initial rating. I'm not sure if that would go up as I became more familiar with the game. I could see that happening if I stuck with it, but we'll see. And that was my month of April. I would love to hear what games you've been playing, what board games you've been playing, what video games you've been playing, what's been exciting you. Based on what I've been talking about, do you have any recommendations for me that might fit my tastes? I always love to hear people's recommendations and check out new stuff. I just love to hear from you, but I really appreciate you watching in any case. Catch you next time. Cheers. Despite the fact that I'm always attracted to a pirates theme, I would describe this game as I guess in a way that kind of so I guess that's kind of more what he's going with. So I suppose that in the broader context, I explained kind of the major problems I had. Go shuttle, take back, either use them,